The rain was heavy that night. Came down hard on the metal roof of the human's cabin, tapping like 1,000 small fingers. The wind howled through the trees, making the shadows outside twist and move. Inside, John sat quietly by the fire, sipping from a warm cup of broth. He was alone, just like every other night for the last 3 years. Then came the knock. It was soft, sharp. 3 small taps on the door. Froze. This planet was not known for visitors, especially not during a storm like this. His hand reached slowly for the old rifle hanging on the wall. He didn't stand up. He listened. Another knock, just like the first. Still quiet, but now slower, weaker. John rose, careful and alert. He moved to the door and placed his hand on the cold metal handle. Whoever it was, they hadn't spoken yet. No shouting, no threats, just a lonely knock. He opened it, a small alien. Girl stood there, soaking wet from the rain. Her thin dress clung to her tiny body, torn at the edges. Her blue skin was covered in mud, and her long silver hair stuck to her face. She held something tight in her arms, a cloth doll ruined by water. Her eyes were wide, glowing faintly in the dark, and full of fear. She looked up at him and said in a soft, trembling voice, "Can I please stay with you?" John didn't answer right away. He stared at her, confused, unsure what to say. She looked no older than 8. Her lips were shaking, her feet bare and purple from the cold. She was shivering so hard. The doll in her arms bounced with each breath. Then she said something that made his heart twist. "My mother died today." Silence filled the space between them. Only the sound of rain dripping from the roof broke it. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stood there, waiting, as if she didn't expect kindness, only a door closing in her face. John looked around. No one else was out there. No vehicle, no lights, just darkness and storm. If he left her there, she would not last the night. He stepped aside and held the door open. She stepped in slowly, like a creature expecting a trap. Her tiny feet left wet prints on the floor. She looked at the fire with wide eyes but didn't move toward it. She just stood there, silent. Her doll pressed to her chest like it was the only thing she had left in the world. John shut the door and locked it. He placed the rifle down but didn't take his eyes off her. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She opened her mouth but no sound came out. She tried again, and this time it came like a whisper. Nolly, he nodded. "Hi." John. He walked to the fire and grabbed a spare blanket from the old chest near his chair. Then he crouched and held it out. "Here," he said. She didn't move at first. But slowly, carefully, she reached out and took it. Her small hands clutched the warm fabric, and she pulled it around her body like it was magic. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. John went to the small heater in the corner and increased the heat. Then he set a pot of soup on the burner. He didn't speak much. He didn't ask questions. He knew pain when he saw it. Nolly sat by the fire, still silent. Her doll now lay on her lap, wrapped in the edge of the blanket like a sleeping baby. She watched the flames, eyes wide, still unsure if this was real. When the soup was ready, he poured a small bowl and handed it to her. She looked up, then down at the bowl. Her hands shook as she held it. She sipped once, then again, and then quickly began to eat. But even as she ate, she stayed quiet. No sound but the spoon touching the bowl. John sat back in his chair, watching her from the side. Who was this girl? Where had she come from? Why was she alone? There were no nearby cities, only a village days away, and even they barely accepted outsiders. A child like her had no chance. He didn't ask her anything else. That night, when she finished her food, she curled up on the floor near the fire and pulled the blanket tight around her. She didn't ask for a bed. She didn't ask for help. She just lay there, eyes open, staring at the fire like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. John placed another log on the fire. Then he sat back watching the flames dance across the room. He had planned to be alone forever. But tonight, something had changed. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight he knew one thing. He had let a child inside his home. And maybe, just maybe, he had let her into his heart too. The storm passed, but the silence stayed. Morning light slipped through the cracks of John's cabin, painting thin lines of gold on the wooden floor. The fire had burned low, just soft embers glowing red. John was already awake, sitting on the edge of his chair, staring at the small shape wrapped tightly in the old blanket near the fire. She hadn't moved much in the night. Nolly was still curled like a leaf in the cold. Her cloth doll was tucked under her chin, and her small hands clung to the fabric like it was her last piece of safety. Her silver hair, dry now, fanned out across the floor. John didn't wake her. Instead, he stood and walked quietly to the kitchen corner. He started boiling water, grinding some herbs into a mug. It was a calming tea, something he drank after hard days, and this girl had already lived through worse than most grown men. She would need it. Then he heard a small sound, a cough, dry and weak. He turned. Nolly was sitting up now. The blanket hung around her shoulders like a cape. She looked around, confused at first, as if she had forgotten where she was. Then her eyes landed on him. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch either. John gave her a small nod. Morning. Shh. She blinked once. Slowly, he poured the tea into a chipped mug and walked toward her. She watched his every step, like a frightened animal ready to run. When he knelt down and held the cup out, she looked at it, then at him, her expression unreadable. "It's warm," he said. "For you?" After a few seconds, she reached for it, but not quickly. Her fingers barely touched his as she took the cup. Even that small touch made her pull back like she'd touched fire. But she held the cup and brought it close to her lips. One sip, then another. Her face softened just a little. Her hand stopped shaking. John sat across from her, not too close. He didn't ask any questions, didn't press her for details about last night. He could tell she wasn't ready for words. Then something unexpected happened. Nolly set down the mug slowly. She slid across the floor, just a few inches closer to him. She didn't speak. She didn't even look at him directly. But her small hand reached out, fingers brushing against his coat, and gently gripped the edge of it. She held on. Not tight. Not desperate. Just enough to let him know she didn't want to be alone. John froze. He had built a life with thick walls around his heart, stronger than steel. He'd lived through war, lost friends, watched others fall, and never looked back. He didn't cry anymore, didn't feel much. But now, this small alien girl, who had nothing left, was holding on to him like he was her last safe place. And for some reason, that hit deeper than anything else ever had. He didn't pull away. He just let her hold his coat, letting her decide what came next. The room stayed quiet for a long time. The rain had stopped, but the wind outside was still cold. Inside, only the fire and the sound of slow breathing filled the air. Then Nolly whispered, so soft he almost didn't hear, "Are you going to send me away?" John looked at her. Her eyes were still not meeting his, but now he saw something else in them. Fear, not of being hurt, fear of being unwanted. He leaned back, letting out a long breath. "No," he said, firm but kind. "You can stay here, as long as you need." Her fingers tightened slightly on his coat. John placed a hand gently over hers. She didn't pull away this time, he added softly. "This place is small and old, but it's safe." Nolly finally looked up. For the first time, her eyes met his. There was pain in them and sadness, but something else too, something faint, like a flicker of hope trying to survive. "Thank you," she whispered. That was all later that morning. She followed him to the garden behind the cabin. She didn't speak much, but she watched everything he did. He showed her how to water the roots, how to check the soil. She bent down and touched the earth gently, like it was something sacred. And then, in the dirt beside the garden, she drew something with a stick, 2 figures under a roof. One was tall, the other small, holding a doll. John saw it. He didn't say anything, but that night he added a new log to the fire, placed an extra pillow by the hearth, and laid out another blanket, not as a guest bed but as part of the Home. A quiet promise filled the space. He wouldn't let her be alone again, not while he was alive. The sun was high and bright, but the warmth never reached the girl's face. Nolly walked beside John as they followed the worn trail toward the nearby village. She held his hand with quiet strength, her cloth doll tucked under her arm. Her head stayed low, eyes on the ground. She hadn't spoken much since morning, but she had asked for one thing. Her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I come with you today?" John had hesitated. He wasn't sure what the villagers would say. But after seeing her eyes full of silent courage, he nodded once, and they set out together. The village was small, built from stone and scrap metal, its homes stacked tightly between winding paths. Aliens of all shapes and colors moved through the streets, selling fruits, trading tools, speaking in fast voices. Then they noticed her heads turned. Conversations stopped. A merchant's fruit slipped from his clawed hand and hit the ground. With a thud, eyes narrowed. Mouths tightened. A few stared at John like he had brought in a disease. Others looked at Nolly like she wasn't real, like she shouldn't exist. Then someone spoke. "That's her," said an older alien woman, her voice sharp and cold. "That's the daughter of the trader." Whispers spread like fire through. Dry grass. The cursed one. She should have died with her mother. Why is the human bringing her here? John felt Nolly's fingers tighten around his own. Her grip trembled. She still didn't look up, but her steps slowed, like each one was getting harder. He stopped in the middle of the path. The entire village was watching. A young alien boy threw a small stone toward them. It hit the ground near Nolly's foot. She didn't flinch, but John saw the way her shoulders dropped. Another voice shouted from a doorway. "Human! She brings danger! Don't protect her! She's not yours!" That was enough. John stepped forward, placing himself fully in front of her. His voice came strong and clear. "She's with me," he said. "Anyone has a problem with that, they come speak to me directly." No one did. They just stared. John stared back long enough to make some look away. Then, with slow and steady steps, he turned and led Nolly toward the supply stall. They didn't speak again until they were outside the village. Nolly finally let go of his hand and sat quietly on a rock beside the trail. Her face was pale, her eyes dry, but her voice broke when she spoke. "They hate me." John crouched beside her. "They don't know you," he said. "They only know what others told them." "My mother wasn't bad," she whispered. "Stole food? Yes, but only to feed me. They called her a traitor, but she only ever ran. She never hurt anyone." He listened without interrupting. "Every time we went near the village, they chased us away. They said we weren't pure. That my blood was dirty. That I would bring ruin." Her voice cracked, and her hands gripped her knees tightly. John placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not dirty. You're not cursed. And no one has the right to say who gets to survive." She didn't answer. She didn't pull away. When they got back to the cabin, Nolly went straight to the back room and shut the door. John stood in the main room for a long time, staring at the closed door, the fire, and the cloth doll now resting on the chair. He thought of the village, of their faces, their fear, and then he made a decision. That night, he took old wooden planks from the storage shed and began building something outside. Just beneath the stars, a small shelter beside his cabin, a space for tools, for extra supplies. But it would also be something more, a message. He carved a sign and placed it above the door. "All are welcome here." The next morning, Nolly saw it. She didn't speak about it. She just walked up to the little shelter, touched the wooden letters with her fingers, and smiled, just once. It wasn't much. But in that smile, John saw something stronger than the village's hate. He saw quiet hope, and that was enough to keep building. The wind was soft that morning, brushing gently through the tall grass, as if even the sky wanted to be quiet. Birds chirped in the trees, and the sound of leaves swaying filled the space around the cabin. It was peaceful, the kind of morning that whispered things can get better. Nolly stood at the edge of the garden, holding a small trowel in her hand. Her knees were dusty, and the sun warmed her silver hair as she worked beside the rows of green. John watched her from the porch, pretending to check his tools. But his eyes kept drifting back to her. She had stopped asking if she could stay. Now, she just stayed. She knew where the soup bowls were kept. She helped bring in firewood without being told. She had her own chair by the fire now where her doll sat every night, wrapped in a clean piece of cloth John had given her. But the biggest change came in her silence. It was no longer filled with fear now. It was full of thought. She was learning the names of the plants. She asked questions about the stars. And sometimes, when the sun was setting and the fields turned gold, she would hum songs her mother once sang, soft alien tunes with no words, just memory. One afternoon, John brought her a small bundle wrapped in old paper. She opened it slowly and found a tiny carving knife and a block of soft wood. She looked at him, puzzled. "I used to carve when I was a soldier," he said, sitting on the porch. "Helped me stay calm. Thought you might like it?" Nolly turned the wood in her hand. It was smooth, light, perfect for small fingers. She didn't say thank you. She just sat beside him, legs crossed, and started carving. Later that day, she showed him what she made. It was rough, uneven, but clear, a tiny figure of him. Standing tall with one hand holding a shovel, John smiled. "You made me look strong," he said. "You are." "Shh," replied. As the days passed, her confidence grew. Like the plants in their garden, she began making small things, wooden flowers, little animals, even a carved nameplate for the door that read, "Home." John left it hanging. He didn't change a thing. One evening, Nolly stood by the open field staring at the sky. The stars were coming out, bright and endless. She turned to John and asked, "Did you ever have children?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He didn't answer right away. "I did once," he finally said. "A long time ago, before the war. Before this planet. What happened?" John looked at the stars too. "I lost them. The world wasn't kind to them." Nolly didn't speak. She walked over and placed the cloth doll into his hands. "She's scared when she's alone," she said softly. "You can hold her when you miss them." John looked at the doll, the same one she had clung to that first night. Now, she was giving it to him, not out of fear, but out of comfort. He didn't refuse. He sat down with the doll in his lap and closed his eyes. Just for a moment, that night she fell asleep on the porch beside him, curled in a blanket under the stars, and for the first time in many years, John dreamed of laughter, not gunfire. The next morning, he woke up to the smell of something warm. He looked around and saw Nolly standing in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. The spoon was too big for her hand, and she spilled a little, but she kept going. "I watched you," she said. "I wanted to try." John stepped forward, his voice quiet. "You're doing good." She turned and smiled. Not a small scared smile, a real one, bright and sure. "I want to learn everything," she said. John nodded. "Then we'll take it one day at a time." Later that week, they added a new corner to the garden, a space just for her. She planted her own seeds, carved her own markers, even shaped tiny wind chimes from scrap metal that sang in the breeze. Her laughter returned slowly. Not loud at first, like a forgotten song. She was learning again. John didn't rush her. He just stayed nearby, watering his rose, fixing the fence, listening to the sound of her voice coming back to life. A home wasn't built in a day, but now, for the first time, it was starting to grow, not just in the soil, but in their hearts. And this time, it wasn't just his cabin anymore. It was theirs. The sky turned red that evening, painted with streaks of fire across the clouds. The wind shifted, not just in direction, but in feeling. Something about the air felt different, heavier, like the world was holding its breath. Nolly was humming softly in the garden, her fingers brushing the petals of a new flower she had grown herself. She didn't notice it right away, the distant hum of engines, the way the birds flew off in a sudden rush. The silence that followed, but John noticed. He stepped out of the cabin, with his sleeves rolled up and a shovel in hand, ready to start fixing the old fence again. Then he heard it, the low, slow sound of a hover transport coming closer. He turned toward the dust. Dust lifted in the distance as a dark vehicle moved through the field road. It wasn't from the village. It was sleeker, larger, and painted. With the mark of the Outer Systems Enforcement, the kind of ship that only came for one reason. His grip tightened around the handle. "Nolly," said without raising his voice, "come inside now." She looked up, surprised, but she knew that tone. She dropped her garden tools and hurried to him. He opened the cabin door and gently pushed her in. "Stay low," he said. "Don't speak unless I ask you to."
What?
She nodded once, then crouched. Behind the couch near the fire, her doll clutched tightly in her arms. The ship landed with a hiss just beyond the field. The grass burned slightly beneath the heat of its thrusters. The side door opened, and 3 armored figures stepped out. Their faces were hidden behind black helmets, and each carried a stun weapon on their hip. John walked out to meet them, his steps firm. The lead officer raised a hand. "You are John Weaver?" "I am." The officer pulled up a tablet, his voice cold and official. "You are currently harboring a minor known as Nolly of Sector 7E, daughter of a confirmed traitor to the Interplanetary Order. The child is considered state property and must be returned to council control immediately." John didn't blink. "She's a child, not property." "She is tagged for removal," the officer replied. "Hand her over." "No," John said flatly. The silence that followed was thick. "You understand? This is a violation," the officer said. "You are refusing a lawful order. We have the right to take her by force if necessary." John stepped closer. "She's not going anywhere." The second officer placed a hand on his weapon. "You're just a farmer, human. This isn't your fight." John's eyes narrowed. "Then why does it feel like one?" From inside the cabin, Nolly watched the figures through a crack in the wall. She saw John standing tall, arms at his sides but ready, blocking the path to the door. She couldn't hear everything, but she didn't need to. She knew they had come for her, and he wasn't letting them. "Take her," the officer sighed. "You have 1 minute to comply?" John didn't move. "I said no." The third officer stepped forward, weapon half drawn, but the leader held up a hand to stop him. "You think you can protect her forever?" "I don't have to," John said. "Just long enough." The officers looked at each other, then turned back toward the ship. "This isn't over," the lead officer said. "We'll return with clearance for lethal action, if required." They boarded the ship without another word. The engines roared, lifting the vehicle back into the air. The ground trembled under John's feet as it rose, then sped off into the distance. Disappearing over the hills, only after the dust settled did John exhale. He walked back into the cabin. Nolly was still behind the couch, her knees pulled to her chest. She looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. He knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said. "They're gone." "They'll come back, yes," he said, "but so will I." She didn't answer right away. Then she asked the question that had been inside her heart since the day they met. "Why do you keep protecting me?" John looked her in the eye. "Because no one protected my child. I won't let that happen again." She stared at him, lips trembling. Then she did something she hadn't done since arriving. She moved forward and wrapped her arms around his chest. He didn't pull away that night. He locked every window, reinforced the doors, and set traps across the property. He brought out an old weapon case from beneath the floorboards and cleaned it silently. One part at a time. Nolly stayed close, sleeping on the floor beside his chair. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew this wasn't just a visit. From the state, it was a warning, and next time they wouldn't just knock. The morning after the threat, the cabin no longer felt like a home. It felt like a battleground waiting to happen. John sat at the table, sharpening an old combat blade. Its edge scraped against the stone with a steady rhythm, not out of fear, but preparation. His eyes were locked in focus, but his thoughts kept drifting to the little girl still asleep beside the fire. Her arms wrapped around her doll-like armor. He hadn't fought in years, He had left that life behind, the soldier, the killer, the ghost. But it was still inside him, sleeping like a wolf in the dark. And now they had shaken it awake. The council wouldn't wait long. He'd seen that look before, the kind of men who followed orders, not morals. They would return, not with warnings, but with fire, and he would be ready. When Nolly awoke, she didn't ask questions. She only watched him, her eyes tracing every movement, every motion of his hand. Saw the blade. She saw the barricaded windows. She saw the tools turned into traps. But she didn't speak until hours later. When she sat down across from him and whispered, "If they come again, I want to help." John looked up. "You're just a child." Her voice didn't shake this time. "So was I, when they took my mother." He didn't reply, not right away. But her words cut deeper than any weapon. After a long pause, he walked over and opened an old storage box. Inside he pulled out a small vest armor. Light and flexible, used once during off-world skirmishes. He knelt and held it out. "It's not made for your size," he said, "but it'll do." Nolly didn't hesitate. She slipped it over her shoulders. It hung loosely on her, but the look in her eyes made her seem taller. They spent the day in silence, preparing. He taught her how to stay low, how to run without being seen, how to breathe slowly when afraid. She listened to every word like it was law. By nightfall, the land outside was no longer a peaceful field. It had become a trap-filled maze, silent alarms, sharp fences, hidden nets. John had turned his quiet home into a shield. That night, they ate together in front of the fire. No fear in the room now, only something stronger, something shared. "You remind me of her," John said suddenly. Nolly looked up. "Your daughter?" He nodded slowly. "She had fire in her heart." "Like you." Nolly lowered her eyes. "What happened to her?" "They took her during the war. Wasn't there to stop it." Silence hung in the air like smoke. "But you're here now," Nolly said. That one sentence, spoken so gently, pulled something heavy from his chest. Before dawn, sky turned dark again, not from clouds, but from shadows falling fast. Another ship was coming. John heard it before he saw it. Louder this time, faster, heavier, not a scout but a dropship, made for quick raids. It hovered just beyond the tree line, blades spinning, lights cutting through the darkness. 5 figures dropped from the side, armed. John moved without thinking. "Nolly," he said calmly, "go to the cellar, just like we practiced." But she didn't move. She looked up at him and said, "I'm staying." "No," he said firmly. "Yes," she said back. For a long second, their eyes met, soldier and survivor, and something has passed between them that no words could hold. He gave her a nod. Together they crouched behind the wall, listening to the crunch of boots outside. Then came the voice, loud and cold. "This is your final warning. Hand over the child or face the consequences." John stepped into the doorway, weapon in hand, his body lit by the cabin light behind him. "She's not leaving." The officer raised his arm. "You've made your choice." But before they could fire, the first trap was triggered. A net snapped up, catching 2 soldiers in mid-step. Another fell into a shallow pit masked with branches. The fourth turned toward the cabin, only to be hit by a flying spark device John had rigged from an old engine core. In the confusion, Nolly leaped from cover and slammed a switch near the porch, releasing a flash bomb that blinded the last attacker. John moved fast, disabling them one by one. Minutes later, the field fell quiet again. The threat was down, injured, but alive. John stood in the middle of the yard, breathing hard, holding his ground. Then he felt a tug on his coat. Nolly stood beside him, armor too big for her small frame, a smudge of dirt across her cheek, and a fire in her eyes brighter than the stars above. "You fought for me," she said. He looked down at her, then up at the cabin, then back at the night sky. "No," he said. "We fought for each other." The sun rose slowly the next morning, casting golden light across the battle-worn field. Smoke curled from broken machines, metal parts scattered across the dirt. The ship was gone, dragged away in silence by what was left of the squad, defeated not just by traps, but by something they didn't expect. a man who refused to give up, and a child who refused to be taken. John stood near the porch, bandaging his arm with one hand while watching Nolly sleep inside. She was curled on the chair, her tiny hand still wrapped around her doll. Her vest had fallen halfway off, and there was dirt on her knees, but she was safe, deeply asleep. Like a child should be, for the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like a home later that day. The village sent a small group to check what had happened. At first, they stayed at a distance, eyes cautious, voices low. But when they saw the remains of the council's gear, their fear began to change into respect. An elder stepped forward, a long scarf tied across her chest. She looked at John, then down at Nolly, who now stood beside him holding his hand. "She is not her mother," the elder said quietly. "No," John answered. "She's stronger." The elder nodded once, and without another word, turned to leave from. That day, no one from the village questioned her place at Gainley helped rebuild the garden. Together, they replanted the rose that had been crushed during the fight. She painted the tools with bright colors and carved symbols into the wood, stars, birds, spirals. Joy returned in her hands before it returned to her face, but one evening, as the sun began to fall behind the hill, she sat on the porch holding her doll and asked quietly, "Will you ever send me away?" John stopped stacking wood and looked at her. "No." He said simply, "But what if they come again?" "Then I'll be here again," she bit her lip. Unsure, John sat beside her, knees bent, arms resting on his legs. "You know," he said slowly, "I used to think I was done with people, that the world had nothing left to give me." She glanced up at him, waiting, "But then you knocked on my door in the rain, and I realized the world still had one thing left for me, a reason to open it." Nolly didn't cry. Instead, she leaned her head against his arm and whispered, "Want to stay here forever?" John placed his hand on her small head gently then. "Stay," he said, "because you already belong here." That night, she painted a sign and nailed it onto the door. "With John's help, family lives here." The letters were crooked and painted in blue and green, but it was the truest thing that had ever hung on that cabin. Weeks passed, the land healed, so did they. The old cabin changed. John built a small room just for her, filled it with carved shelves and painted walls. She placed her wooden toys there, along with drawings she made of him, of the garden, of a house with bright lights and open doors. People from the village began to visit again, not with hate, but with quiet kindness. Some brought seeds, others brought cloth or tools. They didn't ask questions anymore. They simply nodded, offered small smiles, and treated the girl not as a curse, but as part of something stronger than fear. One evening, during a soft rain, Nolly stood at the window, watching the drops fall against the glass. She turned to John, who sat near the fire reading a worn book. "Do you think she sees us?" "Who?" "My mother." He looked at her gently. "I think she does. I think she's proud." She nodded slowly, eyes shining. Then she whispered, "Thank you for not closing the door that night." John's voice was low, but firm. "Thank you for knocking." And just like that, the silence in the cabin became something warm, not empty, but full of stories yet to be written, of memories yet to be made, of quiet footsteps and wild laughter, of a promise that didn't need to be spoken again. Was home, and she would never have to ask to stay again.